I'm Stephanie Schaffhausen. I'm on the board of the NPN Nonprofit Net, also the treasurer. So when I say please make a donation if you really enjoyed the seminar to help us put some of our expenses that we have to put on these free seminars, we greatly appreciate it. You can put it in the little envelope over there. Also, please remember to fill out the cards for the evaluation, because we use those when we're planning for new seminars next year and beyond. We want to have seminars on what you want to hear about. So please fill them out. So you can also, I'm reminded by our board president who left me these notes, because he's off in New Zealand and Australia, that you can join the NPN board. Just let someone know that Vina at the desk, you can tell her if you're interested. You can write it on the evaluation card that you're interested in joining our board. You know what our mission is to put on these seminars for other nonprofits to increase their involvement. So, our spring series is starting today. Goodbye, Cookie. Thank you. Thinking holistically with healthy and holistic nonprofit fundraising. Okay, would you like a little water? I'm going to stick in the coffee right now, but let me finish it off before I get to the next paragraph. Okay, I'm going to tell you about the rest of the year at halftime. Right now, I'm going right to Tracy Sopchak, who founded Next Step Nonprofit. To bring a healthy and holistic model of development to the sector and to help nonprofits build development capacity in an affordable way, always a good thing. Just 10 years of professional nonprofit development experience. In a wide variety of nonprofit organizations, and 15 years experience working in the corporate sector as an engineer and software developer. Tracy also brings her work over 12 years of nonprofit board participation. Collectively, she's raised millions of philanthropic dollars to support the good work of these organizations. And lastly, we want to thank Tracy for giving us the idea to focus our entire spring season on holistic nonprofit practices, which I will hope to give you with the halftime if my voice permits.
Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for being here. Lovely to see your faces. Some of you I know, many of you I don't, so hopefully I'll have a chance to speak with you before we leave here today. But we're here to talk about a holistic nonprofit development model, which I'll explain what I mean. My name is Tracy Sopchak. I'm the founder and principal of Next Step Nonprofit Consulting. Before, I do have a slide to introduce myself a little bit further, but before we do that, I wanted to jump into my motivation for doing holistic development work. So in 2013, and don't read ahead in your slides, okay? It'll ruin it, right? It's all timed, so don't cheat. Okay, in 2013, Compass Point surveyed 2,700 EDs and development directors, CEOs and CDOs, and they found that 50% of the top level fundraisers plan to leave their job within 2 years or less. 40% of those considered leaving the field altogether. Over half of the organizations that they surveyed report having difficulty finding qualified development professionals. And if they had an open position, it stayed open for months or even years. So development professionals are not staying in the field, they're leaving. Those are some pretty staggering statistics. Consider if half of all doctors decided they were going to leave the profession. Those are staggering statistics. So why are they leaving? According to the report, and there's a link underneath if you wanted to find, or a reference if you wanted to read it. Organizations lack a culture of philanthropy, fundraising expectations are unrealistic, lack of support from above and from peers, lack of authority in the organization, lack of adequate resources, lack of a fundraising plan. So this particular study is now 7 years old. I'm not sure that things have changed much from 2013, but what I have seen and experienced, and I'll give you a little bit of my background so you know what I'm speaking from, this really rings true, this really resonates for me. And so it kind of left me wondering if these statistics are real and if some of what I've observed and seen in the field are real, it kind of makes me wonder if the development model is broken. And that's what I'm exploring right now through this consulting work, is asking myself that question and asking, can we do things a different way that's more successful for everyone? So Stephanie did introduce me a bit. I did want to take just a moment to introduce myself a little bit further. The reason for it is that I want you to understand the expertise that I bring to my work, and it's a little bit of a different journey than many nonprofit professionals. I grew up here in Bedford, so right next door. I'm a Bedford native, and I went to Northeastern University. I studied mechanical engineering. Through their co-op program, my first position was actually at Lincoln Laboratory, which is right here in Lexington. I met my husband there, and we just celebrated 25 years of marriage, so good things happen here in Lexington. While I was at Northeastern, I switched over to GE for co-op, and then they hired me there, and I worked there for 7 years as an aeromechanics engineer. So my experience up to that point is corporate. GE had fantastic corporate training, project management, time management, leadership, technical leadership training, absolutely wonderful training that they gave us. They also sent me to MIT. So I hold a master's degree in mechanical engineering from MIT. So all of that is to say that I bring a systems approach, a systems way of thinking and a holistic way of thinking to problems. I didn't so much love being a day-to-day engineer. I loved the education. So I pivoted, I went and I retrained, and I was a software developer for 4 years. I worked at a company called Cadence in Chelmsford. So, and even with software again is a large architecture, it's a lot of moving pieces, and again, it's just a different model of looking at things holistically. So that's sort of my entry into the nonprofit world. When I was at Cadence, I got pregnant with my son. He's now a sophomore in high school. I stayed home with him for 6 years to raise him full time, and that was really my pivot to town-based work. I live in Reading, so a lot of town of Reading committees, my church, that's where all my board work began. And that was really my switch to the nonprofit sector. So it was actually through an organization called Community Inroads, which was known as Jericho Road Lawrence for most of its life, but changed its name recently. I started to get involved in doing volunteer work for nonprofits. I serve on Community Inroads board today, so I still continue to see the work that they do. And if you're not familiar with them, they're a nonprofit that helps other nonprofits. So it's a nice vantage point to see some of the issues in the sector. I worked at Groundwork Lawrence in Lawrence for 6 years, and that's really where I learned the profession of development. During that time, the City of Lawrence and Groundwork Lawrence are very collaborative organizations, and during that time, I had the pleasure of meeting other development professionals in the city, including Gia, who's here. And that collaboration we found to be so powerful to have development people together in the room together, because now we could see the work of each other's organization. We could forward opportunities that maybe our own organization couldn't use. And we were really poised if a larger collaborative effort came down the pike, which it did. That collaboration was really responsible for Lawrence being named the Robert Wood Johnson Culture of Health Prize winner that year. Because of that experience, and because I saw the power of bringing nonprofit professionals together, I launched a meetup in Lawrence and then one in Lowell that are still going for development people to get together. So I also have the experience from that entire network of development professionals. I worked at E4All as their first ever development director. If you're not familiar, E4All helps people start their own small business. Very inspiring work that they do, and they certainly inspired me to start my own. So sort of this seed in my head kind of took root during that time, and they sent me through the Institute for Nonprofit Practice, which is a management program where you learn nonprofit management. So the point being, the first row is technical systems. The second row is really a really wide spectrum of observation of the nonprofit sector. And so through my direct experience, through my observation of my colleagues, through classroom learning, I really was working on this idea of the development model and seeing examples of where it really works great and things are going well, and examples where it's just completely broken. And so that feeds what I'm going to be presenting to you. So coming out of there, my motivation was sustained passion for the sector, really, really, really deep frustration with some of the structural barriers facing the nonprofit sector that I do want to touch on. Frustration that nonprofits don't behave enough like businesses. Again, this feeling that the development model is broken. And then this renewed motivation to start my own business. And so basically I felt like if I wanted to help bring about a change like that, I'd be better positioned to do it in the sector. So I'm not one of those stats, one of those people who's leaving the fundraising field, but I did want to find a new way of doing it. And so that was my motivation. I wanted to talk about, before we get to the model itself, some of the barriers that nonprofits face. And in my mind, these are structural in the sense that it's not one given nonprofit that faces this particular barrier. It's sort of culturally, politically, policy-wide, overarching realities that the nonprofit sector faces. And the reason I want to go through them is, in my mind, they are the reason why I think the model is broken and why a holistic approach is needed. And I would classify them three ways: misplaced morality, measure of effectiveness, and control of operational funds. Those are the three that I want to go over. In terms of morality, that's a powerful word. So what do I mean by that? Well, any company, any corporation has to spend a lot of money on things like marketing, capacity building, product development, and developing their people. They have to do this because if the only thing you're doing as a business is delivering your service or product and you're not thinking ahead and looking over the horizon and seeing what's coming and how you need to adapt, then you're not going to stay in business over the long haul. However, in our society, we have some ideas that don't allow nonprofits to do this as well as for-profits can. So it's immoral, which is a strong word, so I put it in italics just to kind of back off a little bit. Moral is a strong word. But in our society, and I'll explain this in a minute, it's immoral for nonprofits to use money that might have otherwise gone to the cause, and it's immoral to make money off those less fortunate. And so I do think this is changing in many quarters, and some foundations and some funders are coming around and understanding this better. But the general idea is that, if I'm a funder, I have $100 and I see a hungry kid sitting on a street corner, I want to feed that hungry kid, and I have $100, and I want the $100 to go to the cause. Why don't I just go and give that child $100? I could do that, right? But any rational adult is going to see a lot of problems with that. For one, maybe the child's going to lose the money. Maybe someone's going to steal it from them. Maybe they don't understand where the store is, how to find it, how to do the exchange. Maybe if they did, they'd buy all candy. And the bigger issue of why is this child sitting here on the street corner by themselves in the first place? So instead, I don't want to give that $100 to that child. I'm going to give it to the food pantry that they're sitting in front of. And the food pantry, I'm going to do that because now I know they're going to welcome them in. It's nice and warm in there. They're going to give them healthy food. No one's going to steal that food. And on a bigger level, they're going to say, why is this child out here? I'm going to start to call around and figure out what I can do for this child. So all of what I mentioned is value added. It's a value add. And whenever you have a value add, it comes with a cost. So there's an idea in our culture that I don't want that food pantry to take that kid's money. I want it to go right to the cause. And so that's one of the challenges that the nonprofit sector faces. And also, we're not supposed to make money off those less fortunate. So the person who runs that food pantry, if I found out they were making $150,000, they're robbing people in need, right? But we have no quarrels in our society with the corporation leaders making millions. I don't even know how much they millions, billions, I don't know. And even if they fail, they get a huge buyout. So, take a soda company of the world, right? They are pushing sugar water on our kids, making millions and billions of dollars, causing diabetes, but we have a problem with the organization trying to run that's helping to solve that problem. So that's what I mean by that structural barrier. Another one has to do with measuring effectiveness. So if I'm an investor and there's 3 businesses and I want to invest in them, it's pretty easy for me to compare. It's just the return on investment because the dollar is a common metric. I can look across all 3 of them, they all use the same metric. But what do nonprofits, how do they measure effectiveness? Well, it's kind of all over the map, right? How many affordable homes did you build? How many workshops did you run? Did you increase graduation rate? Even if you're looking at the same nonprofit that's doing the same thing, say 3 different food pantries, they might do something a little bit different. They might measure things differently. So the point is, it's very hard for a funder standing away to say, which food pantry do I give this $100 to? So they're left feeling really rather confused. If you haven't seen this before, it's called the nonprofit starvation cycle. And essentially the way it works is, like I mentioned, there's no dollar equivalent, there's no common metric. So funders some time ago came up with an understandable but actually ultimately really damaging way of thinking about how do we compare them by looking at overhead rates. So the idea is if one food pantry has a 10% over rate and the other one has a 30%, well, the 10% one must be doing things more efficiently and more effectively and not taking as much money from the cause. But that fails to take into account scale, and it's also kind of artificial anyway, because when you become a nonprofit, nobody gives you a piece of paper and says, here's how you measure effectiveness so that it's consistent across all of them. So they all measure it differently anyway. So what they do, knowing that they're going to have a problem with this, nonprofits will underreport it, reinforcing the idea that they don't need overhead. And then if they actually tried to function with like a 10% overhead, they'd starve. There's no way. A nonprofit and a for-profit are exactly the same in the sense that they're both businesses. It's just that one pulls money out of the system and one doesn't. But they all need overhead rates, or don't call it overhead, call it, growth money or sustain money, whatever you want to call it. The other barrier, this is the third and last one, is control of operational funds. And so if you're a pizza shop and somebody comes in and says, I'm hungry, can I have a piece of pizza? You say, no problem, here's your piece of pizza, that's $2. Exchange, it's done, the person goes and they eat, solved. In a nonprofit sector, it's a completely different dynamic. It is not a transactional exchange system in the way that we just talked about. I'm not referring to like venture capital, right? I'm talking about operational funding. But in the for-profit, it works something like this, where you have a pizza shop, somebody comes in, I'm hungry, can I have a piece of pizza? No problem, here's your pizza, can I have $2? I don't have any money. Okay, well now there's somebody standing next to you, hey, I'll pay. I have a good heart, I want this person to not be hungry. I'm gonna give you some money, but I know you said it was $2, but I'm only gonna give you $1 because I want somebody else in here to pay as well. This is a matching gift. And because I need to know that what happens if I don't come in tomorrow and you have a hungry person tomorrow, who's gonna pay then? I have to make sure that you're building on my dollar. And by the way, I only want you to use my dollar for more pizza supplies. So you can buy yeast, you can buy flour, you can buy tomato sauce, but this guy ordered a pizza. He didn't order a salad, so I don't want any of this money used for salad supplies. Not for the lights and not for your take-home salary. No, that's not okay. Just pizza supplies. And I'm gonna come back next week and I want a full accounting of how you use my funds. So imagine that not just one client is like that, they're all like that. You've got like all these crazy people in your pizza shop with these ridiculous demands. You're not gonna stay in business for very long. And the other thing is that all of what I just mentioned, you would need an entire team of accountants and the most sophisticated database on earth and running all these reports just to meet these demands. So in the nonprofit sector, funders, it's a relationship value-based exchange. Not when we're talking about earned income. If you can do a nonprofit and it's all earned income, do it. That's mission freedom. I'm talking about philanthropic money. So funders dictate where funds can be used. They want other people to contribute. They want an accounting of how their funds were used. And guess what? All of that is overhead and the funders won't pay for it. So those are the barriers that the nonprofit sector faces relative to the for-profit sector, and they're the realities that we're living with. So the fallout of all of this is, and again, leads right into the holistic model. For a for-profit, the client is the funder. They're the same. It's the same cycle. In a nonprofit, it's the client or the funder. So oftentimes the nonprofit is left thinking, do I serve my client, do I serve my mission, or do I keep my funder happy? And that's what nonprofits have to deal with. So in terms of development and fundraising, what are the implications of this? Well, fundraising is hard. Nonprofit staff, people who get into nonprofits, somebody one day woke up, they saw that hungry kid on the street and said, I have to do something, and they founded that food pantry to serve that child. So they got up that morning and said that no child is gonna go hungry, I'm gonna launch this. They didn't get up that morning and say, I'm gonna keep funders happy. So people in nonprofits are mission driven, they're not funder driven. So eventually at some point, development professionals are hired to deal with the funders, to deal with fundraising. And as soon as that happens, in my opinion, organizations start to bifurcate along two different lines. They divide. It's the service delivery program and the fundraising. And in my mind, that is why the model is broken. Organizations split along those lines. I think tremendous inefficiencies and cultural problems result from that divide, as understandable as it is. So what can nonprofits do? You can't change our culture's attitude toward nonprofit morality, at least not tomorrow when you go to work. We can do it one person at a time, perhaps. But you can be upfront and honest with your funders about what you need. You can't establish a single nonprofit effectiveness metric. There's no dollar equivalent. There never will be. But you can understand and communicate your organization's effectiveness and impact. You cannot eliminate your overhead. Call it something other than overhead. But you can't eliminate it. But you can educate your funders about what you actually need to run an organization. Be upfront and honest. We can all undo the starvation cycle. Refuse funders' reporting demands. You can't refuse your funders' reporting demands. But you can be more selective about the funds you take. So if you have a $1,000 grant, but it turns out really involved application, plus you have to go drive up to New Hampshire for some acceptance award ceremony, and you have a reporting requirement and they want to splash their sponsor label all over everything you own, you're probably taking a loss on those funds. So being more selective about money taken in. You will never be able to make your client and funder one and the same if we're talking about philanthropic money, by definition. But you can adopt a holistic model and you can work effectively together as a team. So, finally, the model. So with all of this going on in my mind and all that I had observed through all my experiences, through the classroom learning, through what I observed about other nonprofit professionals, I came up with what I call a holistic model, because the reality is that a lot of times when people think about fundraising and nonprofit development, they kind of reduce it to grants and galas, right? So your development people are the ones who write the grants and run the galas. That's what they do. But the reality is your ability to fundraise derives from everything in your organization. It derives from your culture, your brand, Impact is sort of the work that you've done to understand your theory of change, to put that down all on paper, your tool set and your board. So, this is just one model. I'm sure somebody else could think of this in a different way, but it's helpful to have a model to present. And what I'm going to do is go through each of these pies, and I'm going to share with you from my experience. And by the way, I don't stand up here and think I'm an expert. I think I'm one person who's worked in some organizations, gotten exposed to some things, learned some things. This is just sort of my observations and my sharing of what I see. I'm sure I still have a lot to learn, so take it with a grain of salt. But what I'm going to do is share from my perspective and what I've seen, what does it look like when your culture's great, and what does it look like and feel like when it's broken? And I'm going to go through each of these and then pause. So in terms of culture, I have a lot of really great slides, I think, on culture, because culture is probably the most important thing in the organization that affects your ability to fundraise. So oftentimes, development is completely underestimated, right? So people just don't realize how much work it is. So, I've seen things like, let's just get rich people in a room and ask them for money. Even rich people, even if, a $10,000 check to them is like a $2, bill to me, they still don't just simply write checks. They still have to resonate with your cause, feel connected to it. It's work. It just doesn't work that, they're rich, so they're going to give you money. It's not quick. It's not, hey, we're going to go do this new building or this new program or this new this. Can you just raise that money? No, it takes a lot of time to do this. Or, let's just send an email to everyone on our list, but we haven't been in touch with them for 3 years. Don't expect a big return. So I would say when development is robust, it's really something. Oh, this, by the way, is, a lot of times it's hire a development person, they'll wave their magic wand and money will appear. So that's what that picture is. But really, it's something more like this, where it's truly cultivation. It's planting seeds in fertile soil, it's watering it, taking care of it, attending to it, and over time it will grow. So when it's robust, funders are understood and they're engaged in ways that are meaningful to them, instead of just being seen as a paycheck. Funders feel ownership of the organization's work. Once they start to define your organization as a part of their identity, then the money flows. Otherwise, you're just always kind of asking for a favor. But when you've really unlocked their heart and they connect with you, that's when they're really going to make an investment. And it's robust when there's actually a fundraising plan to support a strategic plan. So it's not a knee-jerk, last-minute reaction. It's, where are we headed? What are we going to do? Because the fundraising takes time. So you need time to build it into to support the strategic plan. And fundraising is a long game. Another really common issue that I saw was responsibility not being matched with authority. So it's something like this. The child is hungry on the street corner. That wonderful person starts that food pantry, and over time it starts to grow, and now you need more money. Now we're going to hire development people and have a development team to deal with the fundraisers and the funders, but me, the ED, I'm not picking on this ED, just giving you an example. Me, the ED, I don't want to have to do any of that work. I'm just going to hire people and they're going to do it. So they hire people and then they come in and they say something like, okay, so what I need to have a say on who you bring on your board. I need to influence your board recruitment because I need them to reach out. I also need them to form a subcommittee that I can meet with. I also need a database so I can start keeping track of all these things. I need some associates underneath me, and I need to be able to have some influence over what everybody else in the organization is doing in support of development, because it can't just be the development team, it's everybody. And if the ED can make that switch and can authorize that, great. But oftentimes it's, I don't see how we're going to be able to do any of that. Just go raise the money. Don't bother me with all these changes, just go raise the money. And this is what it can feel like, where, this is the ED or the CEO who has the authority, but is not taking responsibility for the fundraising. And your development director is going to feel like that. They have no power. So executive directors are actually the chief development officer. The executive director is the one who is responsible for the fundraising because they have the authority to make change. The development director is really there to support the executive director. And I have heard a stat that EDs are supposed to be spending 75% of their time on fundraising. I think it depends on your organization and what you're doing and what where you are in your evolution. But the point being, fundraising, the executive director's job is fundraising. So what does it look like when responsibility is matched with authority? Resources are made available, best practices are adopted, development is widely owned in the organization. And really, when you have this connectivity between people and a wider sense of ownership of the work and of the fundraising, that's where real creativity and innovation can happen. Change becomes possible, and now your development director is going to feel like this, empowered, because they have what they need to do the job. Another cultural issue that I see is an idea that, and I think I've alluded to this, that we're going to hire development people. They're going to be over here in this section, but we're the ones that are going to do the work. So it's this kind of over-the-wall type of approach. And in many organizations, particularly smaller ones, oftentimes they have a single person who's on the development team. It's the only person doing that work. It can feel very isolating. It can feel like this. There's nobody in your organization who understands the craziness that funders have that we talked about with the pizza shop. There's nobody that you can sort of compare notes with. And that's one of the reasons that I started the development meetup in Lowell and Lawrence, because of this isolation issue. So what does it look like when development is truly a team effort? It looks more like this, where now you've got the full team. Your development director is the coxswain, who doesn't necessarily have the power, but they're the Uber facilitator of everybody else's efforts. But in their boat is the executive director. That's the one who actually has the responsibility for fundraising themselves. Maybe they have a team. The board is so important that I made it its own wedge, so I'm not going to talk about that right now. And program people. So the people who are actually doing the work and the service delivery are so extremely important to be involved in development. So I wanted to talk about that now. So typically, what I have seen and experienced and learned about in the classroom is the typical way that development is done in organizations works something like this. The program people go off and have a retreat and do their planning and do their work and decide what work is needed and what they want to do. And then they decide everything and decide what they want to do, and then they hand that off to development. So development, it says, you want me to do what now, and why is that? And they haven't been in the room, they haven't been fed by the work, understanding the struggles, understanding what's done. It's just being handed over to them. What happens is, a lot of times it's not fundable. Like, that's great, I know you want to do that work. I don't know any funders who would fund that. Or development has no sense of ownership. So it's just, okay, I have to raise money for somebody else's work. And it's not this idea that we're all doing this together and we're all working on the same purpose. So I know there was a story, I forget who did this, but I should find out. But there was a visitor who came to, I think it might have been Kennedy, who visited NASA during the space shuttle launching. He talked to a guy who was emptying the waste baskets. And he said, what do you do here? What's your job? And he said, we're putting a man on the moon. So we're not there in development. It's, oh, these other people are helping kids and I'm here because I have to raise the money. But there isn't this widely owned sense of ownership yet. So, but anyway, the development people, okay, great, I know I need to raise money for that. Can you tell me again what those details are and why are we doing this? Okay, great, I got all of that. Let me go see what I can do, put the grant application together. And lo and behold, it actually gets funded. Now, development people are very busy, program people are very busy. Sometimes there's not great communication between the two. A lot of times program people don't even know the money came in because development people didn't do a very good job of letting them know. So they weren't aware that we got this money, we now have these new deliverables, new outputs, new reporting. There just hasn't been any communication between the two, so program's unaware. But the program people go, fine, okay, now this is in, I wasn't planning on that, but let me figure out how I'm gonna work in that extra workload that I hadn't thought about. And they do go out and deliver all the services. Now it's time for reporting. development has not been involved in it, so often you come back 6 months later, they haven't done the work. They just haven't done the work. You have to go back to the funder, ask for an extension, or they have done the work, but the data is not collected. They haven't administered the survey that they were supposed to administer. And so development people have to spend an inordinate amount of time working with program people to dig up all that data. So how many workshops did you run? Who was there? Where was this all kept? There's no central repository for all this data. So it's incredibly wasteful and time consuming to have to pull all that information back out to get it to the funder to report. But probably even more important, the client voice is often missing because the development person was not involved in the implementation of that work in any way. So they're always third party writing about somebody else's work to help somebody else. It's twice removed. So a thought here is, what if we kind of take this long piece and bring this together and bring it into more of a cycle? So now, let's imagine again that the program people they want to go off and figure out the work that they want to do. If there's a development person on their team, part of their team, and they're in the room when all of this planning is happening, a couple of things are going to happen. For one, the development person might actually have some ideas about programming that the program people hadn't thought about. They can also explain the funding landscape so that it's clear this can be funded, this can't. Or if you twist it just a little bit and talk about it this way, or add this one little component, I think that would be fundable. And also the development people would feel like it's their work too. So it's quite a difference when you have to go out and write an application and it's just a burden of more things on versus, I understand, I feel it. I feel that need in my heart. I feel that problem and that crisis. I'm gonna fund that. Because now you become the person who saw the hungry kid on the street corner. It's not removed so much. You're a part of the team. Now when you go and write the application, usually it's gonna be a more compelling application because you're writing from your own heart, not in the third person. It's a lot quicker too, because you already know, you're already up to speed, you already understand what's needed. And now program is going to be more aware of who funds their work and kind of like what some of that craziness is that you have to deal with. Now when they go off to deliver the service, they understand what the funder is expecting and why and how it works. So they're getting the data that they need to get, they're delivering the work on time, and development people are there involved in it in some capacity. Not that they suddenly don't have to write grants anymore, but can they be a part of the work delivery? Because now when it's time to go report to the funder, again, more accurate and compelling because that person's writing from their heart, not the third person. Reports are more quickly written, and the client voice is much more present in the work. A couple more on culture. How are we doing? Okay. So another thing that I see in the field is that when you have this bifurcation, this division, and program people aren't exposed enough to the funders in the funding world and sort of that crazy pizza shop that I mentioned, what they end up doing is they'll attribute all of that funder craziness to the development person because that's the person who's saying it to them. You can't use that to buy lettuce. You have to use it to buy yeast. What? That's crazy. I know it's crazy. It's not my role. It's the funder's role. So what happens is because they don't really realize it's coming from the funder, it just looks like, your development person are nagging you, like, did you do that workshop? Did you do this? Did you do that? Really, the way I think of it is when development's role is understood, it's something more like this, where the nonprofit is the earth, the funder is the sun, and life on earth is not going to happen without that really important sun. We need the funders. We need them there. However, some of their craziness, if it just lands on the earth, it's going to, scorch the earth, and that's not going to be a great situation. I think of development as the atmosphere. And our job is kind of to deflect some of that stuff. Like, you know what, we're not going to go for that funding because we're actually going to take a loss on it. Or this is going to pull us from our mission. It's going to be mission creep. We're not going to do that. So what development is really doing is kind of deflecting a lot of that, but some of it's going to get through. And so if it can be understood what their role is and what they're trying to do, I think it would be a healthier organization. Another issue is having to do with how strategic an organization is. it being too rigid or too reactive causes a lot of problems for fundraising. And so what I mean is, in the extreme, if you're too rigid, this is when, maybe you want to do like a 10-year strategic plan and you want everything spelled out and know exactly what you're going to be doing. The problem with that is everything changes so quickly that, the ink is dry, when it hits the shelf, it's not up to date anymore. So it can result in a lot of analysis paralysis, lacking spontaneity, missed opportunities, being overly cerebral. So that's kind of the obvious one, where if you try to plan way too far ahead, that what happens is, that federal funding got canceled and everything was built around that, or some new funding came up or some new partner came up. It's just such a dynamic field that it's hard to plan too far ahead. On the other hand, if you're an organization that doesn't want to do strategic planning at all, and I can understand that impulse because of what I just mentioned, that's really problematic too, because when you have no strategic plan, there's no real fundraising plan. It just is reactive all the time, and it's hard to raise funds when there isn't some idea of what's our strategic framework, where we know things are going to change, but where do we think we're headed? Because that's the story, and that's how you have to tell it. It can also result in some impulsive decision making when decisions are made with no organizational support. So I've actually seen this in action where, the temptation when you're in the room of, yes, we can do that, and committing the whole organization without having gone back and pull everybody else along. So, the rest of the team just feels like they're on the end of the string, being whipped around, and things are changing too much. The team feels no ownership. It also can mean that you're chasing money. So, and if you haven't done a good strategic frameworking and planning, do you really know who you are? Because the world is chaotic and it's going to pull you from your center. You have to understand who you are so that you know when to say no to money and when to say yes and when to collaborate. And so I would recommend, if not quite to be in exactly the middle here, because I think that the world is going to tend to pull in the other direction. What I think is that an option is to do more like a 5-year strategic framework and then do an operational plan where you can only see over the horizon a year or 18 months. Just do that, because now you can feel good and empowered about, these are our resources, this is what we should do, because we can see it. But you still need that umbrella framework, because if you don't know who you are, what your mission is, what your values are, your theory of change, and what it is that you're trying to do, what does success look like in 5 years, the world is going to pull you off of that. But having a shorter term operational plan allows you to be a little more dynamic, and you can keep revisiting it. I'm going to just skip ahead a little bit. So what does a healthy culture look like? The ED owns development. It's facilitated by the development team. Everyone in the organization, the board, the program staff, they have and fulfill an appropriate development role, and they're held accountable for it. There's a thoughtful fundraising plan that's based on history that allows for some innovation in support of the strategic plan, robust and timely mechanism for gathering feedback. The program staff know who their funders are. The development staff are engaged during the program planning and implementation. And development has the support that it needs to do its job. So I'll just stop there. Does anyone have questions about culture before I move on?
We have a microphone there to ask questions, so please pick it up and ask your question.
I'm not sure I need a mic. I have a question about the 75%. Did I understand you to say that the 75% of the executive director's job is development? Not that 75% don't do it.
Oh, right, yes.
That's what I thought first.
Oh, I'll have to clarify that. No, I meant that 75% of the executive director's job should be doing development work. Yeah.
Here's my question on the culture. Given how scarce resources are in most nonprofits, are we prohibiting us or organizations from answering, putting a man on the moon? Do the titles get in the way? What else is it of that bifurcation or great divide? Like, is the word officer the right name, the team member, a facilitator? If you really want everyone engaged and people are doing 2 to 3 jobs, what's the best way?
I don't know that I have a pat answer for you, but I think you're on the right track with, we do get kind of stuck in our roles. You know, I'm the youth program director, right? And what does that mean? Can we loosen that up a little bit? And, you know, for instance, instead of it being all service delivery people and development, can it be organized around, like, this is the youth development team. There's a development person on the youth development team, right? And I don't know what their titles would be, their roles would be, but I think it's more defining the way we do work. I don't know if it's so much the titles, but when planning is done, who's in the room? You know, when work is implemented, who's on site doing it? And so, and I hear you, because, you know, you do need someone to write the grants, you do need someone to run the event, but are there creative ways, and I think it would look different in each organization, but are there creative ways that development people can get out from the office and go and be a part of it so that they feel ownership and part of the team? And, you know, in terms of like a return on investment, if your development person leaves and they take all that organizational, institutional knowledge with them, it's a huge hit. And bringing somebody back in with the relationship. So if it's a little bit of a hit on their time in terms of letting them get out there, letting them be a part of it, it might be a really wise investment if they stay with you longer. So I don't know if I answered your question. And like I said, I don't have all the answers. But I do think that it's the way we team together to do particular job functions that matter.
Oh, thanks, Tracy. Just a practical suggestion, something that I actually learned from a member of the Lawrence Development Meetup Group. She would ask at the beginning, at the very, very early in the process of applying for any grant, she would have a grant meeting with the program people, and she actually had forms she developed so that she was there in the room with them and they understood what she needed, and the process, they were all invested in the same thing. So it was just grant by grant that she did that. But I thought that was just a really good approach.
That's a great suggestion.
So my question is, when you're working in small nonprofits and you have very limited staff, where you don't have a development person, right? And you basically have one person maybe doing 3 jobs, right? That's one thing. And then the other thing is, I know that you said you'll talk about the board a little bit later, but also the board's role in fundraising and development.
Yeah, it's interesting because when organizations start, oftentimes there's no divide that I'm talking about because it's the same person doing the work, right? So it's kind of, I think the challenge is, how do you maintain that connectivity as the organization grows and as you bring more people in? I think that's the challenge, because if you're motivated and you see the problem, then it's going to come right out of you because you're the one that's creating it and you're the one that's delivering it. So I'm going to move on to brand.
Tracy?
Yeah.
We need to break about 2:30 or so to allow people to feed meters if they need.
Sure.
And go to the bathroom or whatever.
I'll start and then we can take a break. So when I think about brand, the way I think of it is that I have seen a lot of organizations, and their evolution is something like they get started, they get really good at writing grants, and they're writing really long narratives and lengthy narratives about the work that they do. And that's going to work if you have a foundation reading it or a government official reading it. But when you start to try to bring in corporate funders or individual funders, and now they want to develop a website, a lot of times what I see is they take that lengthy narrative and stick it on the website. And it doesn't work. And I think the reason it doesn't work is that I don't actually know the areas of the brain. I'm just showing you a brain. But my point here is that that when you give someone a big lengthy narrative like that, I think you're asking them to use their left side of the brain in the sense that it's like, okay, you want me to sit and read concepts and they're complicated and did you put the comma in the right place? And okay, right. And I have to think about it and I have to use sort of that side of my brain, which I think is concentration, reflection. For me, it would be quiet. Maybe I'd be on the couch with, some tea. I'm processing your words. I'm thinking about your grammar, and I'm investing time. So to me, that's all like a left brain type of activity where I'm in my, what's the word? When you're introvert. I'm in like my introvert brain, right? But I think brand is actually the other side of the brain. I think brand is all about color and image and quick and emotion and shapes and visual and it's very quick and immediate. That's what brand is. So I'm not suggesting to do away with all the other stuff. I'm just saying if you're trying to brand what you've done, you can't simply take the big narrative pieces and stick it on the other side. Brand is about color, images, design, all of these things. So I think that it's the challenge with branding a nonprofit is to give them just enough information that they're going to want to take some other action. Be it sign up for your newsletter, make a donation would be great, show up at an event, or just read more on your website. But how do you take that and show it quickly enough and engagingly enough that they're going to want to do it? So I go through some branding components. We'll just see how far we get before the break. I think organization names are important. A lot of times they're, forgettable, they're not related to mission. A lot of times they're not positioned for the organization's growth. So if I want to call it the, Chelsea Tree Project, but now I want to expand to all of Massachusetts, I might have some problem because I haven't branded it correctly, the name of the organization. So just as an exercise, if you think, look at these organizations and think which of them is a mental health crisis service organization, if you can read them from there. They're also on your form. So it's a trick question, they all are. And so I actually went up and looked, and so the thing is, like, some of them speak to it, a quiet refuge, that kind of speaks to me about the work that they're doing, but 211 Brevard Inc., I have no idea what that is, right? I mean, maybe if you live near there, you know what it is, but just for this exercise and for the point I'm trying to make, sometimes nonprofit organizations are named for their founder. Like, what does that have to do with anything? It's all about the mission. It's not about who founded it. So a good organization relevant to your cause, distinctive from other organizations. There's a lot of issues like the YMCA, the YWCA getting confused. Groundwork Lawrence, where I worked, always got confused with Lawrence Community Works. The names were just a little bit too similar. Visual to be met, it should evoke an emotion and immediately convey the work that you're doing. So an example is Habitat for Humanity. I think is I use that one through the whole branding, just so you're aware. But I think it speaks right to it. It's Habitat for Humanity, right? There it is. Very easy. Logos. If you want to have a little fun, go look at epic logo fails on Google. I had to keep this sort of friendly, so I didn't use most of them that are in there, but oftentimes they're forgettable, they're visually busy, they're illegible. The embarrassing ones are the ones I'm telling you to go look up that I'm not going to show you here, or they have poor color combinations. So, I mean, these are the ones that came up when I looked at, epic logo fails. So the tree is lovely. I can't read it. I have no idea what that organization is. It's beautiful. The Epcot one, I think, is visually busy. It's a little crazy to understand. Okay, I included one embarrassing one. I think the house is supposed to be like he's hugging you and welcoming you home, but it looks to me like he dropped his pants. So there you go. I think the pink one there, I think that's a bad color. So logos that are good, just as an example, they should be simple, well composed visually, not too literal, legible. And there is a whole thing with good color psychology. I don't know it, you could go read it, but there's a thing with color psychology. So here are just some examples when I looked up logo successes. The mentoring project, I love this. I mean, you get the idea. It's, someone large helping someone small. And it's beautiful, right? And again, I have Habitat for Humanity in there. They get the point across really well. We'll just do mission statements and then I'll stop. Mission statements, from what I've seen, like I mentioned, they have those big long paragraphs, and often what they'll do when they're talking about their work is put everything under the sun in the mission statement. So they end up being too long and wordy. Sometimes they're oftentimes too focused on the organization. So the mission statement is something like, this nonprofit was founded in da-da-da, and this is what we do, and this is what we do. When you are talking about branding and somebody doesn't know your organization, they don't care who you are. And I think that's a really hard thing when you founded this organization, you've been doing it for 30 years, how could somebody not care? They really don't. They don't care about your organization, they care about your cause, they care about your mission. Sometimes contain jargon, detailed approach language. Detailed approach language is I think the main reason they get bloated, because they want to put everything about what they do in there. So this is an example of, that's not a real organization because I didn't want to pick on anybody, but this is an example of what I would say is a really bloated mission statement. There's not a lot of jargon in there, but I can't even get through the whole thing and then I'm lost. So instead, a mission statement, it should be short. It should speak to your why, not who you are, but why you're doing what you're doing. It should mention your how, your approach, but at a really high level. Don't get into the nitty-gritty. That's where they start to get really big. Use simple words, be compelling. So I rewrote this one just as an idea. So this one, at least you get the idea, oh, they're trying to build more vibrant neighborhoods and they're doing it by supporting artists. Okay, at least it gets the point across a lot more. And these are a couple examples. Habitat for Humanity is there. And the Nature Conservancy conserves the lands and waters on which all life depends. There's a lot more to it, a lot more to that organization, but in terms of brand, short and sweet. So why don't we stop there so people can go bio break, feed your meter, and we'll pick up from there.
7 minutes is our. So, I would like to try and finish reading about our holistic seminars coming up. We have the one today, which is holistic nonprofit fundraising. Next month is You Don't Need an MBA to Understand Nonprofit Finance, presented by Ellen Sturgis, a consultant with over 30 years of nonprofit experience in management, finance, and operations for small to medium-sized organizations. So that will be in March. So I'd like to reiterate that we're hoping that you can give a donation of any amount to help offset the costs of putting on these seminars. It takes us about over $700 a year to maintain these things, and we'd like to keep them free. So you can get income tax credits for those who itemize. And if you need a receipt, please speak to someone at the desk. Thanks. And questions, the microphone will be right here.
Thank you. Okay, so let's pick back up with brand. And so one concept that I wanted to share is that I think sometimes when we think brand, we're thinking just the name and the logo, because that's sort of the typical pieces that we think of as brand. In my mind, when we're talking about nonprofit brand, it's what is just enough information that's presented just engagingly enough for someone to want to take a next step. And I think that's brand. And I think name and logo is maybe not enough when we're talking about nonprofits. So what I tend to notice is a lot of times organizations have a name and a logo, an overly long mission statement, and lengthy descriptions of everything else. I would say that's a who, a why, and kind of part of a how. But I think the full package also has some information about your impact and what it is that you do. So I think a complete brand package says who you are. I would say that's in your name and your logo. Why do you exist? I think that's your mission statement. What are you trying to achieve? Your vision statement. How are you achieving it? pulling out your approach into some approach bullets, pull it out of the mission statement, just list a few bullets underneath just to give people a sense of the work that you do is enough, and what progress you've made, impacts, stats, and testimonials. So here's an example. I'll just put the whole thing out. This is Habitat for Humanity. So just imagine you didn't know them at all, and you spent however much time it takes to look through this. You'd probably walk away with at least an idea of who they are. For instance, I didn't realize they had such a strong religious affiliation until I looked into them, but it's right in there. So either you like it or you don't, but they're really explicit about it and you know. And you understand the work that they're doing. You get a sense like, well, 22 million people have built or improved their homes since 1976. It just quickly gives you a scope of how big this organization is and what the work is that they do. So this is just an example of a brand that I think, if someone is looking at you for the first time, and maybe this is even more time than they would spend. I've heard things like 8 seconds on a website, I don't know, but hopefully someone with a big heart has a little bit more time, can read through and at least get a sense of who you are and do they want to take a next step. Affiliated brand, I don't want to spend time here, but just the idea that your brand is impacted by others that you're affiliated with. So if you have a fiscal sponsor and your funder doesn't know you at all, but they know you're a fiscal sponsor, that helps your brand. Whereas, if you're trying to raise money, for instance, in partnership with a municipality, and that municipality has a bad financial reputation, that can hurt your brand. So there's affiliated brand components that need to be taken into account too. So that's brand. I'm going to move on to impact. And unless anybody has a burning brand question, I think brand is a little bit more intuitive. Yes?
How difficult would it be to change a name or a logo?
That's a great question. And I think that the logo, depending, like for instance, I worked for Groundwork Lawrence. That was more challenging because we were part of a network, a national network. So there was a Groundwork Somerville and a Groundwork Hudson Valley and a Groundwork this. So we couldn't change much. We couldn't change the name, couldn't change the logo. I don't think we wanted to, but couldn't have. And I think that I don't actually know the answer to your question in terms of legal issues. Like, do you have to actually go back and I don't know if you can just put a DBA, a doing business as, and change the name. I think the name change would probably be harder than a logo change. Does anyone know? Has anyone?
The name change is a legal process with the IRS. You don't have to change your EIN, but you have to, notify the IRS and wait for them to approve it and send you a letter before you're supposed to use it publicly. I know that from experience. And as far as changing the logo, I don't think that's a legal matter unless it's like a registered trademark or something like that. So that's what I know.
Thank you.
Moving on to impact. What I mean here is, so we talked about brand and we talked about Habitat for Humanity's brand, and I included some impact data in there. I think in terms of what I mean by impact and why it has its own little slice is that there's a lot of work that goes into figuring out how we're going to do our work, how we're going to measure it, and how we're going to lay that out, on a timeline and in a process. So when I say impact, I mean kind of all the heavy work behind it, so that you can pull out a few stats to show them in your brand. So I think the work of impact is shown in brand, but the work itself, what I see a lot is that many organizations, they have a sense of their mission. They know why they're doing what they're doing. They have a sense of their vision of when we're done, what does this look like? But to me, impact is sort of what's in between those two bookends. They often lack a theory of change and a logic model, for example. So the theory of change, it's not that an organization doesn't have a theory of change. If you're doing the work, you have some sense of, I think this is going to work because, but what I mean is that a lot of organizations haven't put it down on paper and sort of explicitly stated it. And I think that that's important because it helps you in your own brain work around does that make sense? Is that what we want to do? And it helps you communicate your work to others and to bring others onto your team. So I think just the act of stating it, and I'll explain what I mean by that and a logic model. So it's something like this. We have 3 organizations here, and they all have the same bookends. They all have the same mission. In this case, we want to make sure that food is available to hungry school children. And they all have the same vision: until no child is expected to learn on an empty stomach. So this is same bookends. But we're going to look quickly at 3 different organizations who have really different approaches. The first one runs a food pantry within the school for parents to pick up food for their kids. Okay, so that's what they do. So their theory of change has something to do in their minds, whether they've stated it or not, that parents are the best advocates for their children's diet. Right? I made this up, by the way, so you don't have to agree with me. Organization B, okay, this one's going to activate a school garden for students to grow vegetables for lunch, for their lunches. Okay, so a totally different approach. Maybe their theory of change has something to do with you should give healthy food directly to children and increase their appreciation for vegetables. Okay, it's just an example. Third one, this one, they're going to work with the district to implement policies for free school lunches. And this theory of change is very different. They're thinking we need a structural change here across the entire district to really bring about the change that's needed. So I think if you're really applying to like federal funding, and they're going to want to see like what is your evidence-based theory behind this, this speaks to that. I don't think that's necessary for all organizations, but the more you can kind of be explicit about what's our thought process back here about why this is going to work and what's some data to support it.
Could one organization?
Can we get the microphone, please, so that we can hear? Because we're trying to record this, and if the questions aren't recorded, then they're lost.
So given that the mission and the vision are the same among these 3 hypothetical organizations, could conceivably one organization with that mission vision do all those 3 things?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this is really just for, educational purposes that I've brought these out. Probably organizations do 1 or more of these. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the theory of change underneath it, the mission is the same, the vision is the same, the approach is totally different because their theory of change is different. And then if we're looking at a full logic model here, don't worry, I'm not going to go through the whole thing in detail. It's as simple, but I want to get the point across that have you thought through, like, what are we bringing into the system? What are the resources we bring? What are we going to do? How are we measuring the outputs, the outcomes, the impact to society? And the point being, the mission and the vision are the same here. Because the approach is really different, their logic models are going to look really different, except that their vision is the same, so they're going to start to converge toward the end. So if you're a food pantry, then you better have some place to store your food, and you better have a donor network. If you're a school garden, well, you need to have a garden and maybe some starter plants. If you're going to do a district policy, you need political relationships. So the point being, what they need is vastly different at the front end because their approach is different. And then you can imagine that really impacts the type of people they're going to hire and staff. So the organizations are very different. If you're a food pantry, one activity you would do is sort donations. If you're a school garden, you're going to cultivate plants. If you're doing the district, then you're going to attend meetings. So again, the skill sets of staff involved vary widely between understanding how to cultivate plants and understanding how to navigate politics. Outputs for the food pantry, maybe you measure the number of canned goods stocks, the vegetables grown for the garden. Maybe you measure the policy draft submitted to the district. So outputs being what's most in your control. So you can control whether you delivered a workshop. You can control whether you planted a plant. As we start to move out, you start to have not just less control, but also you can't take the full credit for it. So if you're looking at, we want to measure increase in high school graduation rate, and you're doing one project, you can control your output, but once you start to get wider into the outcome, you can't claim all the credit, right? There's other things that are involved. As we start to look out at outcomes, we can say, well, how many parents actually came to the food pantry? How many children do we actually give the vegetables to? How many schools actually adopted the policy that we drafted? And then in the end, and the impact starts to look a little bit more the same. Now we're actually getting food to children. So it's starting to converge a little bit. And then the point here in terms of a funder looking at this, because they now kind of have an idea of how you're going about this, they have a little bit more detail. You wouldn't show them your whole logic model, but what would you share with them? The idea here is that because you've done the work and gone through and done this work, they're going to be able to compare your approaches with other organizations and get a sense. They might be asking themselves, how quickly are the children going to get access to the food? With the food pantry, they're going to get food right away. With the district, that could be years. And so your funders, every funder is different. They may have an affinity to your organization, to your approach because of an issue like that. How likely is it to be implemented? Maybe that food pantry is a real problem for some reason because of, I don't know, zoning or licensing. I don't know. How likely are the children to eat the food you actually give them? How many will be served? How scalable is the solution? How sustainable is it? So the point is that every funder is different and they're going to have different interests and they're going to resonate differently with the work that you're doing. But if you've kind of spelled this out and present this through your branding because you've done this back-end work, then I think they're going to be able to understand who you are and compare you to other organizations. And then just a plug for, we can't just say sort donations. We have to make sure it's, a smart metric that's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, timely. I'm not going to go through all of these, but it's not just sort donations. It's every Sunday during the school year from 9 to 5, 3 community volunteer. You get the idea that, if you're actually reporting this to a funder, you have to be fairly specific about what exactly that you're doing. So impact is all about, have you done the work to kind of, you have your mission, you have your vision, how much have you spent time figuring out that connective tissue?
What do you mean by S.M.ART? Oh.
So at the top here is SMART metric. So this is, probably more applicable when you're writing, a federal grant or a foundation grant. Sometimes they'll ask for SMART metrics. And it just means instead of saying, oh yeah, we're going to hold some meetings. Well, can you be more specific? Like, what's the time frame that you're going to do this? Who's going to do this? Is it measurable? That's a really good question. Is that something that you're actually going to be able to attain? Is it actually relevant to the work that you're doing? So a SMART metric is one that is all 5 of those things. Any questions on impact before I move on to tool set? So the point being, with impact too, that the more you're able to show that you have a robust thought process underneath, the more it's going to appear to a funder that you've thought this through and that you know what you're doing. In terms of a tool set, I see a lot of organizations, even ones that have been around for a long time, that when they have their contact information, it's actually on everybody's staff iPhone, or it's, maybe it's in a spreadsheet somewhere. They might have like a constant contact type of database, but I had one client that opened a room and gave me like 5 huge boxes of paper with all their information. So it's not just your contact information, but all your funding history, like who did you send the appeal to, when was it sent, how many meetings did you have with them. All of the information collected on the actual cultivation tends to either not be recorded or it tends to be a little bit all around the place. The problem with that is, obviously you can lose contact information, but you can also miss a deadline. That's a real problem. Or you could have like multiple asks of the same funder if things aren't coordinated and people don't know what's happening. So this is a plug for a proper constituent relationship management database. And what that means is that you now have, if you have a piece of contact information, it's in one place as a primary source. It's in the database. You might have different ways that you can get at it. So for my business, I actually use a product called HubSpot because it's free. I don't think it's great for nonprofits, but it's great for small business. But I put it in my HubSpot database, but then I can access it through my phone. So there's different ways that you can get at it, but one single data point, so when their email changes, it's changed in one place. That a good CRM system should give you a means of recording all of your giving history and your ask history and your engagement history. So it's, when did you first meet someone? What were they interested in? You invited them to an event. You sent them an appeal. Now they gave you the appeal. All that stuff needs to be recorded. So the more personalized you can make that ask of someone, the more they're going to feel like you know who they are. And also, it allows you to manage grant cycles. So, a grant cycle could be everything from you have to go to the information meeting first, you have to put the concept paper in, now they're going to do a site visit, then you do the application or whatever the process is. Now they're funded, now you have reports due. So a CRM system allows you to put all of that, the deadlines into the system in a way that makes sense and that everybody can access. It also makes it easier if you're bringing new people onto the team or you're handing off development efforts from one to another, because you can hand over the whole profile and they have all the history data that's there.
Question on that.
Yeah.
Do you have a recommended point at which microphone? Please. Oh, sorry. Hello. Yeah. Do you have a recommended point along the evolution of a nonprofit? At which point this makes sense to invest in, because it's a lot of time to manage that as well. So, do you have a thought on that?
So my opinion is from day one, because I guess you can make a decision about how much time you want to invest. So for instance, in my business, it's just me and a couple other folks, but I have it all in a database because I don't, in fact, so if I meet someone, and because it's very much similar to development, then I'll meet someone and they'll say, oh, we should do this project. I'll go home that night and just put them in as a lead. So I put it in, I put their contact information, I just put a lead in, and then I can forget about it. And I think that's really empowering instead of it being in the back of my mind. Then if it goes forward and they contact me, and eventually we put a proposal together, and the first time that money comes in under that, now I have a lead time. I know what my average lead time is, and I know all the steps that went into it. But it's not like every time I have a phone call with someone I might record that. It's more, if there's something relevant and I don't want to lose it, and it's in my brain and I don't want to lose it. But I'm an engineer and I'm a database person, so for me, it's from day one. But certainly, I would say the first time you add a second person to the organization is pivotal. If you're like the founder and you're the only one doing it and you have your own system and everything works and you don't have an issue, then it's fine. Once you add somebody else, how do you share the institutional knowledge that you have? If it's all in your head, and I've seen this, like EDs who have been there a really long time, it's all in their head, and they don't do succession planning well, they leave and it's gone. So I'd say the answer is day one or when your second person joins the team. You can also put tasks in there. You can manage things via campaigns, which is really helpful. You can say my 2020 operating campaign, and within that we're going to do an end of year appeal and then link it back in. So there's different ways to kind of slice and dice the asks and the money. As you get more people too, usually a good CRM system, you may not want your intern to know who your anonymous donor is, and you can do controlling of who sees what data to keep things private that needs to be kept private. And this slide is just, I talked about a CRM system. There's a lot of technology out there, and I'm surprised sometimes with nonprofits not making use of technology that's out there. I don't know all the ins and outs of all of these, but there's certainly like a lot of event planning. There's mobile payment that you can use at galas. I know there's impact measuring software as well. I haven't done much volunteer engagement, but I know there's some software out there. So just kind of a plug for, there is a lot of great technology out there. There's also wealth and search engines, the foundation directory, and other databases that are available too. So another tool set that I want to talk about is I see a lot that organizations, sometimes when they're making decisions, it's done either because they're making them based on emotion or instinct or history, because there's big money on the table, or because the likeliness to secure those funds. And I think all of those things are valid. Being in development, you get that rush when it's like, this new thing just got announced and it's big money and we could probably go for it. And I think having that development instinct is just crucial for success. Like that, I'm gonna get that, that kind of an instinct. But what I think too is to also step back and look at more factors, bring more in, so you're really doing a full return on investment analysis. So it's something like big money is coming out at the federal level and it mostly fits our mission and the work that we're doing. But when you really look into it, they're only awarding 2 nationally. So you have to ask yourself, is it really worth it to go into all of this? Is your ask really that compelling enough? There may be reasons you want to put an application forward anyway, because you're going to develop the collateral material and then shop it around to other funders. So maybe it allows you to collaborate with a new partner for the first time. So there may be other reasons. But a lot of times I don't see that organizations are looking at all the data that's available on a funder. Have you really looked and seen where they fund geographically? Are you in their geographic range? Sometimes they'll have budget limitations. They won't fund somebody over a certain budget. So what I see is sort of on the front end, that instinct of we should get that money, and then just not following through with, okay, wait a minute, let's, in a less impassioned way, walk through all the steps and make sure that we've looked at everything and compared it to everything else that's going on. There may be one that's not so interesting, but it's much higher likelihood that funding will come in, and it's probably a better return on your investment of time to go for the one that's maybe not so interesting, but it's going to come in, versus the flashy new one. The other thing is the true cost of an opportunity. So here, one of the things I'm talking about here is like a lot of times I'll see organizations, when they're not familiar with fundraising, say, we have to have a gala. We better run a gala. We better run a fundraising event. And that's understandable, because then you can ask, it gives you a reason and a deadline to ask for money, to ask for sponsorships. But I guess what I see and what I'm feeling about it is that when they actually at the end of the day look at what was the return on investment, they'll say, okay, we made $30,000. Great. We know we have to take our expenses off of that because we had a caterer or whatever. So, okay, it's the net. That's the net. But to me, you're still not done looking at the return on investment, because you haven't considered all your staff time that went in. You haven't considered your board, the fact that for the past 6 months, all your board has talked about is getting tickets to this event and nothing else. And all of the lost opportunity of where you could have put those hours elsewhere. So to me, sort of a more comprehensive return on investment, particularly around fundraising events, is to consider how much that's taking over. What is the value really? There may be reasons you want to do an event anyway, because it's your 10-year anniversary and you want a big celebration, or there may be other reasons. So I'm not saying don't do events, but if the only reason you're doing it is to raise funds, it's probably likely that there's better ways to raise funds if you can really activate your board to advocate on your behalf, for instance. In terms of development staff, so this I see a lot too, where organizations don't necessarily understand that when you're saying a development hire, development people have vastly different skill sets. And it's important for you to know where you want to raise your money so that you know who to hire. So I have seen often that organizations will hire a grant writer, for instance, when what they really need is a major gifts officer. And those are 2 totally different people. And a single development person can have skills in different areas. I don't mean that. But for instance, if you need somebody to write all federal grants and you're hiring someone who has no grant experience and they've only done corporate sponsorship, they don't have the skill. It's a skill that they have to learn and develop. Whereas if you want to be going after a lot of major donors and you're hiring a grant writer, again, it's a misfit. So development people are not all the same, and their skill sets are not all the same. So understanding where your money is going to come from. Are you going for federal money? Are you going for foundation money? Is it corporate? Is it major donor? So where your money comes from dictates who you need on your team. And also, who else is already on the team? So like maybe your ED is a fantastic grant writer. So yeah, you're going to be writing a lot of grants. You don't really need it, but maybe the ED is just not so great at meeting deadlines. Maybe you really need a project manager. development person who can make sure that everything's facilitated and everything gets in on time. So I think, I have seen not enough of an appreciation for the distinction and skill set among development people. So that's tool set. Any questions on tool set? Okay, we'll go on to the final one. Boards. So boards are so incredibly important in an organization's ability to fundraise because you hire people, development staff, maybe they're great grant writers. It doesn't mean they have connections in the world or that they're connected to a source of money, right? So the development people can do the work and do the setup and do the facilitating, but they really need people to help them get the word out and advocate and network. And I think that boards really struggle with fundraising, depending on the board. Most of the ones that I've seen anyway. I'm sure like the really big national nonprofit organizations, maybe they don't have this issue, but the ones that I've seen do. And one of the things that I see is that they don't recruit the board members that they need. So a lot of times, if an organization is getting started, the first people that they put on their board are like their friends, or their relatives. It's a buddy board. They're, people who know them, that they know they can work with them, they know they can help. And that may work for a time, but eventually if you really want to start fundraising, that's not going to work. A buddy board won't work anymore. Another thing that I've seen is that organizations are overly representative. So that's kind of a funny thing to say, but let me explain. That some organizations that I've seen, for instance, let's say you're an autism organization and your mission is to help people with autism. But then on your board, you have everybody on your board is very closely related to that autism effort. So maybe it's a parent of an autistic child, a person with autism. So you're really making sure that the people on your board understand the issue, that your organization is offering the services that it should be offering, and that you're on the right track. And that's really vital and it's really important. But if you don't have any fundraisers, any powerhouse, any well-connected people, you're on the right track here. I'm pointing to my screen, but you're looking over here. You're on the right track, but you're on this little push car. You have no power. Alternately, if you have a fundraising board that's really well-connected, and all power to you, hard to find, but these are really powerful people, really well-connected people, powerhouse board. However, they don't represent your client. You run the risk that you're going to be going 100 miles an hour on the wrong track because they don't understand your client or what you're supposed to do. So I think the best situation is to be somewhere in the middle where on your board there are people who really understand it. So, a Lawrence youth serving organization, people who have grown up in Lawrence and understand that population, know the language, know the culture, and understand that the work that's being done is the right work. However, until you get some people on your board that are well connected or have money or access to money, it's not a fundraising board. And I think as long as you decide what role your board is, and if you're happy with them not being a fundraising board, that's fine. But if you want them to be a fundraising board, make sure that you've recruited for that purpose. I have noticed that boards, in terms of recruitment, they tend to just want to fill quotas. We have, in our bylaws, it's 11 people. We have to have 11 people on there. Or sometimes they'll be hired because they have specific skills, legal skills, other skills, or they bring important affiliations. And I think all of that is really important and necessary. But also, if you could bring somebody on and they're really well connected or they have a really important skill, but again, if they're not really passionate about the work that you're doing, it's still going to be an uphill battle to kind of push them to reach out to their networks, to use the skills that they have. So I think the primary thing for board recruitment is, are they passionate about the mission? Are they going to help move it along? Also, sometimes you have people on a board and they're on 10 other boards, and so they'll show up for their meetings, but they don't really do anything else, and that's not something that I would recommend. I would say have a smaller board of people who are really passionate and committed instead of a large board that they don't really do a whole lot. In terms of board meetings, I do notice that they can fall into some ruts. It's so often that you show up at a board meeting and you're just going right for the financials. And I think what can happen sometimes is that, I have some other ones on here too. But what can happen is that if you have a board and they're not really familiar with your organization, the program people, the executive director and the staff, they're the ones doing the work day to day. They know the work, they're fed by the work. It's the same thing that I'm talking about with when development people are too far removed. If your board also is too far removed and not a part of it, then they're not going to be able to feel that inside themselves and bring about sort of their own transformative energy. It's always going to be kind of one removed. So if they show up and all you're doing is talking about the financials and you've missed the fact that, wait a minute, there's a hungry kid on the street corner, then you're not opening them up. Sometimes it can be an executive director therapy session dominated, overly rigid to the agenda and the time, mired in minutia. So from a fundraising standpoint, what I have seen work well is making sure that the mission is a constant presence in the board meetings. And how do you do that? So one board that I'm associated with, we've introduced a mission moment into the board. So again, the staff people have been doing this work all day long, and then they come and they know the work. The board members have been off doing other things, and they come and sit down. They're not grounded in the mission. So how do you bring the mission in? So some examples are, you could ask a client to come to the meeting and share what was the impact of this organization's work on their life. You could have a testimonial that people read. You could even have like a short, nothing more fancy than an iPhone video that, as the people in the organization have been out and about, hey, can I take a quick video of you? I want to bring that back to the board. So any way that you can bring the mission back at the beginning of the meeting. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Also, if it's possible to have your board members engaged in the actual work. So if it's a food pantry, can they go down and serve food? Any way that you can connect them to the work that's being done. And it's the same thing with the development people, so that it's not third party anymore. It's that they're now talking about their own experience. So board members, the best thing that they can do is to really understand and live the organization and live the mission, so that as they go out into the world and they're talking about themselves and their own life, maybe they talk about their job and their work. Oh, and I'm also on this board. Now they can speak from their heart and they can speak from known experience because they've been engaged in the work. Whereas if it's always a third person telling them about everything, then it's harder to advocate and it's harder to tell a story because you're telling somebody else's story. But if they can be involved in the work, oh yeah, I was serving food on that food line, this person came in, I had this exchange. If it's their own personal experience to the extent possible, then I think that they're better equipped to advocate for you. Also being clear about what board members are expected to do. So board members are usually pretty good at showing up for meetings, participating in the conversation at the meeting. Sometimes they'll break into subcommittees and they're pretty good about doing the work of the subcommittee. But as soon as you talk about fundraising, that's usually where everybody clams up because they don't want to, and I have actually been in this situation before where I'm asked to ask my friends for donations to the board that I'm serving on. I don't want to do that. I don't want to lose friends. I don't want to ask my friends for money. That's a really uncomfortable position, and I'm not sure it's all that effective. But I think if we can start to work with boards so it's not a direct ask like that, but it's a little bit off-center. So it's not, would you make a contribution, but let me tell you about this organization. Let me tell you about the work that they do. Let me tell you about the experience that I had. Why don't you come to an event? Or I'll send you their newsletter. You should read this article. Or let me introduce you to the ED. So it's the board's role, as I see it, is not necessarily to make that direct ask. If they can, great. But if they're uncomfortable with it, how do you help them make it so it's not so scary and frightening that they're having to ask for money? Can they thank your donors? Right, so a donor has come in, can they make a phone call, like during a board meeting, you have a 10-minute phone call time, or they do it off board time, where they're actually calling people who have donated and just say, thank you so much. It's a way that they can connect to your donor without having to make the ask. Also, having clear and achievable expectations. So it can be like, there should be clear expectations when somebody joins your board of what they are expected to do in terms of fundraising, so it's not a surprise. They should be making a financial donation. Some boards actually have a minimum you have to donate over, but most of the boards that I know, just making a contribution is helpful to them because now they can say 100% of their board donates. And that's really important because if the board is willing to put their own personal money on the line, then clearly they're committed to the cause. But being really clear, and I've seen some boards with like this in the orientation packet when you're asking. It's what happens a lot is we just have to fill this quota. We just have to ask. Let's get somebody else on the board, and then they're on the board, and it's really not a good fit. And there hasn't been work done to really explain to them when you come on. This is what it means. It means you have to attend the meetings. You have to attend that volunteer night. Have to attend. These are the things that are expected, and we need you to make a donation so that they know what to expect. So before they come in, they're not going to be surprised with these things. There's also, an idea of it being sort of a give-get board goal. So some board members are going to be able to give from their own personal checkbooks. Some are not, but they might be able to get funds for you. So either maybe they work for a bank and the bank can sponsor you, or they're going to help you write some of your grants or prospect for you, so they're going to help you get funds in, but they may not do the actual giving themselves personally. And I think expanding it to a sort of a give-get and even setting a goal. What's the board's contribution last year? Can we up that by 10% this year? And kind of making it a goal for the board. The other thing is storytelling, and I think it all kind of weaves back in together, but actually practicing storytelling with your board. So I think they get kind of hung up with I have to ask for money instead of it just being what is the elevator pitch for this organization? What is the work that they do? So as they're out and about and in their life, it's just going to come right out of them because they know the story. There's this great story of this person that we helped, and helping them tell that story and being comfortable with it, and even bringing in a storyteller into the board and helping them come up with their elevator pitches, or having a moment at every board meeting where somebody can weigh in and say, okay, who told the story, this month? Does anyone have a story about how you did it or how you tried to do it, but it was a struggle and you kind of want to review that? So sort of making it like a thread that's brought into board meetings about how do we tell the story of this organization? And if they're not comfortable and they don't know how can the mission be brought alive more so that they're more equipped to do it? Another way to kind of do things just off-center is instead of them asking people for money, they can do things like you put a fundraising campaign together on social media. Are they willing to promote it through all their channels? So it's a way that they're asking for money, but it's not a direct ask to an individual. Are there ways that they can promote the fact, they would donate to the campaign and then kind of say, hey, look, everybody, I donated to this. It's a way that they can do it where it's not quite so uncomfortable. So that's board.
So if you haven't had much luck getting effective board members, where do you look for them?
So I know with your organization, you deal with people who are suffering from grief. So people who have lost someone and help them find ways to work through the grieving process. To me, I would look for somebody who has benefited from your organization in the past, and asking them to come back on in sort of a pay it forward type of, or they have been so affected by the work that you've done that now they can be on your board and give back. Does that person have money? I'm not personally someone who's like well connected to a wealthy population, so that one's a little harder for me to answer. But in terms of it being passion, I think it's somebody who just simply has seen the effect of the work that you've done. I know sometimes hospitals will develop donor bases and board members from people whose lives they've saved, for instance. So, if it's like a youth organization in a city, is it somebody who came through the organization, now has gone off to, great college education and doing this, and then they can come back and be on the board because they know it and they understand the mission of it. So I think I'm better equipped to answer more the passion piece of it, in terms of like connecting to really wealthy people, I don't really know either.
A good suggestion too, like for your organization, do you have partner organizations, for instance, like Merrimack Valley Hospice? Are they referring people to you, or somebody like that who knows what you do, but maybe you can ask somebody in the leadership team through a partner organization of yours?
Another good one is like I know banks, for instance, often want to have their employees in the community and connected. So for instance, Enterprise Bank in Lawrence, they put people on a lot of boards, and that's really nice too because then they'll back it up with sponsorship money. So like, why would it benefit someone to be on your board? In that case, it's because it allows that bank employee to connect into the community. It's part of the work that they do, and it's part of their business model. I don't mean that to sound in a cold way, but it's part of their business model where their people know people in the community. So what's the benefit for the board member that you're trying to recruit? Is it also that it allows them to develop a skill that they hadn't developed before, or maybe they're retired and they want to use a skill that they used to use? So I think thinking about the motivations for what do board members get out of being on the board is an interesting topic too.
Are there legal issues associated with board meetings? You mentioned an agenda and stuff like that. Like I'm familiar with the open meeting law for town organizations. Is there anything like that for nonprofit organizations?
I think they may differ in complexity. Like I'm thinking back to the church board that I was on. In our bylaws, we had to have, like the minister had to be on the board, and the board chair obviously had to be there. So there was definitely, because of our bylaws and the way that it was written, there were requirements that certain people be on the board and participate, and there were certain requirements that we had subcommittees on the board. Some will have that. So I think it's a lot of what's in your bylaws when you form. Like sometimes there needs to be a governance committee, and a lot of times it'll be like the governance committee has to have at least one board executive on it. You can have subcommittees off to the side that can be populated by people not even on your board, like advisory boards, as long as there's one board member. So I think a lot of it is stipulated in the bylaws when the organization is set up. How bylaws are usually fairly involved to change, but I think they can be changed if you really wanted to do that. But I don't think there's any legal issues around like bringing a client to your meeting, unless of course it's a sensitive issue. But I don't think anything around like getting your organization more mission or your board more mission oriented or any of those other things. I don't think there's anything legal there. Certainly, let's say you're dealing with domestic abuse, there can't be sharing of who that person is. I'm sure there's legal issues around that, but did that answer your question?
Yeah, I was thinking mostly about like your meeting minutes. Do they have to be published? Who do they be published to? The financial obligations, because you're technically a nonprofit, you're legally a nonprofit. Does that impact the legal components of anything related to the board?
Yeah, I think so. I think, you have to take meeting minutes. I don't know that you have to share them so much as you have to keep a record of them. Certainly, you have to do your audit every year, and so all the pieces that are around that. The board usually has to approve the budget. The board usually has hire fire over the executive director, so there's certain very specific legal roles. The board is the fiduciary, the entity that has fiduciary responsibility for the organization. So, for instance, that's why a lot of boards get board insurance, so that board members are not personally liable. So long as but there are legal implications to the fact that they're fiduciary because of their fiduciary responsibility. So if they were acting in a way that was not responsible, there's actual legal language that I'm not going to remember, but it has to do with as long as you're making a reasonable, well-intentioned effort to keep this organization financially solvent and not, obviously stealing money and all that sort of thing. But there are certainly legal implications there to board meetings. Some of them use like Robert's rules, which is probably what you're talking about with town meeting. I think that's overkill for some organizations, but the church board that I was on, we used that because there were so many different opinions that it was a way to have some sort of process so that you could control, getting to a decision quicker. But on other boards that have tried to use that, it sort of seems like overkill. So I don't think it's a legal requirement.
I have a general question, nothing to really relate it directly to the board. You had mentioned something about, like people having annual gala and spending money and time doing that. And I have attended some galas for nonprofit, which are a little bit larger organization, not very small. But do you feel like it helps when they announce, like, who is giving how much money? For some people, it's very embarrassing. They don't like it. But they say that it does help them to raise more money.
I think it depends on the sponsor. So I mean, some sponsors are doing it because they want the publicity. So if it's a corporate sponsor, generally it's coming out of their marketing budget, and they're doing this for the very reason that they want to promote their own brand. That's why they're doing it, and because they want to help. But whereas I know there are other funders, ones that, foundations, for instance, that fund year after year, they really don't necessarily want the notoriety, and that's not what they're in it for. I think what's interesting is to think about, for the ones that are like the corporate sponsors, does it have to be a gala? I mean, that's sort of the default. But are there other, what are they really after? And I know in talking to some banks about this, that for them, what's really gold is if you have a photograph with the people, the clients, and they're in it, and somehow their logo's in there somewhere, and you blast that through all your social media, they can actually capture that picture and put it on their own corporate responsibility page, and now, they basically want to borrow your brand to a certain degree to help brand themselves as socially, responsible corporate citizens. So I think it depends. Every single situation is different, but I do think there are some that would be open to having conversations about what is the most valuable thing to you, and does it have to be through a gala, or could it be through an event that we're already running? So for instance, like E4All, when I worked there, they give pitch contests. So people come together, they pitch their business ideas, there's a panel of judges, and then they give away this big check, right? It's not, a lot of money, but like $2,000. So what we were able to do, instead of running an entirely new event, why don't we just get sponsors for what we're already doing? So then it's an event, we put their logo on the check. And their people got to present the check along with E4All employees. So they get their picture that they want, and they get it through social media, and that's what they really want. So in that case, we didn't have to have an entirely new event just for that purpose. We were able to sort of refashion something we were already doing. So it's a much lighter lift on the sponsorship.
Isn't that conflict of interest?
I don't think so, no.
I was talking more about, they have an annual event and they try to raise a lot of money through that event. But there are a lot of people who stop going to the event because they are very uncomfortable because, they're announcing people's name, how much they contributed. So it's a kind of a two-way thing, Some people enjoy that because it's an event and they get to meet their friends, they network. But on the other hand, some people get very uncomfortable because they don't want that to be announced. They want to be, anonymous.
I think that funders should have the option of having their name announced or not announced if
they
they really aren't.
They have the option.
Yeah.
They do have the option,
But I mean, I have seen fund a need at events before where it's, we're trying to raise this much money for this, and there is sort of a groundswell of excitement that we're almost there, and if you have a really good MC who's like, we just need this many more, and people seeing other people give does sort of get them,
to get more money.
So I'm not saying that fundraising events are wrong, but I just wish that people would give it more thought sometimes. Can you refashion something you're already doing and make a fundraising component for it, or really checking in with the funder. What is it that they actually want? What are they going after in terms of why they're giving you money? Some are going to give you money whether you list them in the event, report or not, and so I think it depends on the funder.
I think the key to a gala is the wine.
Yeah.
I know, and the food.
Social lubricant.
It's so true.
Well, in some galas, like you go and it's like I forget which gala I'm at. I don't even see the organization here. Do you know? It's just an event at the, you know, the local club, you know, somewhere else. It's like, does it really speak to that organization? The better ones that I've seen have really made like integrated something of theirs in there that it's undeniably that organization's gala because I don't know, they have a big fashion show or I don't know what it is, whatever it happens to be related to their mission.
Well, I was thinking of Groundwork Lawrence, where they
Yeah.
have environmentally inspired art.
Yes, yep,
That's
Very
a
unique.
wonderful gala.
yeah, yeah,
They hold it in Lawrence.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Right.
Oh, we're running past our legal time.
Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate all your time.
I think we all really appreciated the information that Tracy brought to us today. And I hope you take your little handouts home and go over them with a fine-tooth comb. You'll get a lot more information. And I hope to see you here in March for our next